Yes, sir. I definitely will do that.
Because sometimes it happens that if you don't see it, I would try to narrate things in such a way that even if you don't see it, you at least have some idea what I'm presenting. So technical issues happen, and we will work with it. So I think it's dot 11. If people are around, start.
Yeah, the streaming has started.
Let me just change my chair. Hi, Anandita.
Karthik, you are the moderator today?
Yes, ma'am. And the recording, has it started? Start recording.
Yeah, yes.
Second day of the workshop Scicomm for Scientists 2021. I'm Karthikeyan Ganesan. I'm a second year BSMS student at IISER Kolkata, and I'm also an editor at Cogito 137, the Thought Capsule. And as Professor Bandyopadhyay mentioned, I'll be the moderator for today's talk. So today's talk is on the topic Storytelling as a Scicomm Tool by Professor Subhajit Bandyopadhyay. Sir, thank you so much for being with us here today.
My pleasure.
To all the participants out here, here's a brief introduction on our speaker. Professor Subhajit Bandyopadhyay is a professor at the Department of Chemical Sciences, IISER Kolkata. He did his MSc from IIT Kanpur and PhD from University of Victoria, British Columbia. Following the footsteps of all his gurus, he believed that education would be incomplete without a Cambridge education. Therefore, he spent a year as a research scientist at the University of Cambridge before joining IISER Kolkata as an assistant professor. His current research interests include photochromic materials and biomimetic chemistry. Apart from research, he is currently the faculty advisor of the Cogito 137, the Thought Capsule team. He played a pivotal role in the growth of Cogito 137 in its infancy stages and was one of the key members behind its initiation. He was a faculty of IISER Kolkata who pushed for the approval of the proposal to start this science communication platform. He also...
Karthik, you're supposed to wait.
Oh. Why?
There's a problem with the live streaming, so just hold on.
Oh God, sorry. I didn't see the chat. Sorry.
Karthik, you're not on campus, are you?
No, I'm at home.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, Karthik, just wait a while. Basically, I have the live logged in on my phone and this here, but it's not coming there.
Oh, okay.
Shirin, you're on the call, right? Can you also check on your phone? Because now some people are getting some are not. Okay, Shreyash is getting on his phone. Okay,
This is
then yeah,
coming.
I think you can continue. Yeah, okay.
Okay, should I continue or should I start from the beginning?
Wait, let me just check this out.
Anandita, can you check on your phone as well once?
Yeah, we can hear all of us there. So it's perfect. Right.
Okay, then yeah, Karthikeyan, you can just continue.
Yes.
Okay, I'll continue then. So, as I was saying, he was a faculty of IISER Kolkata who pushed for the approval of the proposal to start the science communication platform. He also helps the team by reviewing editorial applications. It is a general consensus among the team members that he doesn't need any convincing for the approval or supporting any ideas put forward by the team, and we are extremely grateful to him for having such confidence in us. So, without further ado, I would like Professor Bandyopadhyay to take over. So.
Thank you, Karthikeyan. I think if I summarize the long introduction, I could probably just say in a few words that I am the oldest member of the Cogito family. And
Yes,
I like it to be introduced that way.
and in fact, I joined in April. So the last part, which about Cogito, I was told by Arunita. So I mean, if something is not correct, I sincerely apologize for that.
Okay, so can you see my entire screen?
Yes, sir, it's visible.
Yes.
It's clear?
Yep.
Okay, let me get started. First of all, thank you.
Are you going to go to presentation mode? Because right now it's in slide sort of.
I am in the presentation mode. I
Editing
am
mode.
indeed in the presentation mode.
No, we can see it in the editing mode.
Yeah, something happens to Google Meet. Let me try once again. So I stop presenting and then I try to present once again. Share. And I go to F5, it should. Is it working now?
Nope. Subhajit, you can try the reading mode. That works. The first one.
I can try which mode?
The reading mode, the first
Is
one.
it working now?
No.
Or maybe Subhajit, if you just share your entire
Subhajit, you
screen.
can try the
I
reading mode.
perhaps should do that. Yes, that is something I was thinking of doing. So I present my entire screen and I go full screen.
Yeah, that might help. This is
Share.
always a problem with Google Meet.
Yeah, I think it's this was a
They have
very,
some bug. Yeah, this is
Yeah, it
working.
works. Yeah.
yeah, all right. So if there is any technical glitch, let me know. I will slow down or stop. Okay.
Karthik, maybe you could put this on the spotlight so that we can see only Subhajit in the corner.
You don't need to see me, you can see the slides.
Okay, I'll put this on spotlight.
Tell me when to start.
Right now, there are a lot of people on the screen, so I just want that to go.
Yeah. So for my audience, just to tell you that this is a very informal session. Feel free to stop me. Feel free to ask questions. If you have some valuable comments, you can definitely give me the valuable comments and I will proceed along with you. Okay. Sometimes I might ask feedback from you. So maybe I would ask for volunteers. All right. So
Yeah.
can I start now?
Yes.
Now, I don't really need to tell anything about the title of the talk because as all of you are very well aware of, storytelling is a great tool for science communication. I mean, I don't think there is any doubt about it. Yesterday in Professor Gadadkar's talk, he very eloquently sort of stressed on the fact that indeed storytelling is a very important thing in science communication. And we as a scientists are here not just to do research, not just to publish our paper in research journals, but it is our responsibility to communicate the science that we do to the general audience. Why is it necessary? I mean, all of you once again know very well that we use public money. We use the fund, research fund that is available to us. It's funded from the taxpayers' money. So we do have a very important responsibility of communicating our science to people. So now, why storytelling? Well, I mean, first of all, when we are telling our science to the people, we have to remember that we are catering a wide range of audience. All right. Starting from a person who does not know science, you're going to your barber shop and you're chatting with him. You are going to a tea stall where there are another 5 or 10 people who you are interacting with. You are in the bus, train, and so on. You are interacting with the mass. That's your audience number one. Or even sometimes when you are talking to children, and school children, or even people who don't go to school. So we have the responsibility of telling our science to these people. That's audience number one. Second audience is people who know some science. Okay, they have perhaps a up to high school education in science. And then, of course, you have the experts, people who are scientists. So for these three levels of audiences, you have different way of pitching your story, right? So first of all, it's really important that you know who your audience is, who you are talking to, all right? Sometimes it can be quite challenging, but because your audience could be very diverse. And when you have a diverse audience, a heterogeneous audience, where you have people from section 1, section 2, and section 3, experts, non-experts together, then my suggestion is you come to the lower denominator. Come to the lower denominator and make that as the same platform for everyone. So you are telling the story from a very non-technical perspective. Okay. So you engage your audience, and when you do that, you have to emphasize on the relevance of the science that you are talking about. Okay. Now, in a technical report, when we write a paper, there are lots of facts and figures and statistics and data and graphs and so on that we present. Of course, these are very important things when you are actually publishing your scientific data to the experts, okay? Quote unquote, these are the people who are the people who would either follow your research, maybe they would reproduce it, maybe there would be people from the industries who would try to do the same thing that you have done in your lab and scale things up. So it is really important that you provide all the data, facts, and figures when you are catering to this audience who are experts. But today, we are not really talking about that kind of audience in this talk. Our target audience today is going to practice writing or communicating science to the general audience. All right. So yes, everything, all the data, facts, figures, everything is very important. But when you are presenting your data to the non-scientist, it is important that you present your story in such a way that all these facts and figures are there inside your story without those technical languages. All right. Now, it is also important that you establish an emotional connection between your reader and you, or the science that you are going to narrate. Okay, so that is really important, because imagine the situation that someone who does not know your science, does not understand your science, would like to have a take-home message from your write-up or from the story that you're going to tell them. All right. And while doing so, if you are completely disconnected to your audience, it doesn't really work. So what do I mean by this connection? I will elaborate as I proceed with the talk. Now, it is important that at the end of your, either when you are talking to the people or you are writing an article, at the end of that, people should be able to get the whole story without any confusion. There has to be a cause and effect relationship in the story. Again, as I proceed with the lecture, you sort of understand what I mean. Now here, I have a picture, as you can see, of ECG. All right. Now, why did I put this up here? The reason what I want to emphasize here is that as you are narrating your story, the heartbeat of your audience should change. That is exactly what we are looking at. All right. Otherwise, if it does not change, it's just going to be a monotonous story, a monotonous lecture, a monotonous article. That is not what you want to do. That's the biggest no-no. And here I have taken this picture of one of my favorite characters, Obelix, who is a big, strong man. And even he is a big, strong, stout man, a good story can also change his heartbeat. Okay. Now, engaging the audience. Now, I need to tell you the power of storytelling. We are human beings, and we are the only species on Earth who have the capability of narrating a story and listening to a story, both ways, right? It doesn't work if it's one way. So we can tell a story, and we can listen to a story and get something out of it. You have probably, many of you have read this book, Sapiens, by Yuval Noah Harari, where he emphasizes on the fact that our entire civilization exists because we believe in certain things. We believe in stories. And he gives this example. This is not my example. This is Harari's example. He says, a lot of things work because we believe in things like God, right? I mean, there could be states which are governed by a religion. And why does it work? Because people believe in God. People believe that if I don't do this, then God is going to do something to me. Or even some economy, if you take out a banknote, it's nothing but just a piece of paper. But why does it work? I mean, why would people give the value of a banknote? Because we believe, we trust in something, that the story that was given to us by our state is true. That this piece of paper actually, would get me something for whatever it is, 500 rupees or $5 or whatever it is. So we believe in stories, and we are the only species on Earth who can tell stories and listen to stories and believe it. Okay. Now, storytelling is indeed a very effective mode of passing on a message. And it goes beyond the facts and figures, as I was telling you, and it touches your heart, your emotion. And that's why you believe in stories. Okay. Now here, I have sort of enlisted few suggested reading. I don't know if you could read it off the screen, but what I plan to do at the end is I would perhaps put it in a piece of paper, or I can send the email with all these suggested readings to the organizers who can send it to you. All right. The first paper that I have jotted down here is a wonderful paper that people who are interested in science communication might like to read if you have not read it already. The paper is by Dahlstrom, written in 2014. And the title of the paper is Using Narratives and Storytelling to Communicate Science with Non-Expert Audiences. It's published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. And it's really a wonderful reading. And then there are the other ones. I'm not just going to read them loud. Let me move on with the topic. Now, how do you tell a story? How do you tell a story? There is apparently a wonderful formula that was suggested by this gentleman named Gustav Fraytag. He's a German novelist and a playwright. And he wrote this book called Die Technik des Dramas, the technique of drama, where he gives you the formula of successful writing a successful drama. And here I have taken this picture from the original book, but what I will do is I will definitely tell you the Indian version, not the German one. So here is something that is technically called the Fraytag pyramid or the Fraytag triangle. Some people use an arc instead of these zigzag lines like triangle or pyramid or anything. It's just the arc. So any of them is fine. You can technically use the word Fraytag pyramid. It's fine. Now, what does it tell you? It tells you that any story, any good story, would start from an exposition. What does that mean? Well, in the exposition part, you are just setting up the stage. You are giving the background. You are giving the background, what happened before, what is the situation, what was the situation, who the characters are, etc., etc. Of course, you don't have to introduce all the characters, but the primary ones. Okay, so that's the exposition. Now, as the story starts, there is an inciting incident. Something happens, and the action starts from there. So initially it was nice, flat, simple, plain, and then something happens. There is an action. All right, and then it builds up the tension of the story. It just goes up, 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 and it can even get complicated as it's going up. So the straight line that I'm drawing here as rising action might not be a straight line. I mean, it could be a zigzag line going up and down and bit up and down and so on. But this is the most simple form that I have drawn here. And then at some stage, it reaches a climax, okay? The climax. And then from that point, things start to get resolved. The problem that was created start to get resolved. And then you have a final resolution, okay? A final resolution. And then at the end, you have the denouement, the ending. So this is the general formula that Fraytag has given us to write a successful story. Now, what I will do right now is a demo of that story, all right? And I will take a story that all of you know. So there are two con men who you know, perhaps. Jay and Viru, they were in the jail. And then when they came out of the jail, there is a retired police officer, this gentleman, who goes, his name is Thakur, he goes and meets Viru and Jay, all right? And why does he go there? He goes to Jay and Viru with the plan to capture a bandit Gabbar who kills his family, all right? Now from that point, tension starts to rise, all right? Now, Jay and Viru goes to the village where Thakur lives, and Thakur lives there with his daughter-in-law, widow daughter-in-law, because their family was killed. Only the surviving members of the family was Thakur and his daughter-in-law. Now, as the story progresses, tension rises, things get a little bit complicated. I was telling you about the complication, right? It's not just a straight line. I mean, there could be blips and a little bit of a bumpy road. Things get complicated because Jay and Viru have Basanti and Radha respectively in their lives. I think it's the other way around. I think Jay is in love with Radha and Viru is in love with Basanti, the cart woman, and things start to get complicated. And again, Gabbar sends his gang to the village to loot. Things get complicated. But the climax of the story starts when Gabbar holds Basanti as a hostage. So everyone likes Basanti. They would like, I mean, particularly Jay and Viru, they would like to get Basanti back. So they start the action against Gabbar, and then things start to get resolved. All right, falling action, and Gabbar is killed. That's the resolution, and the ending. And the ending is Jay loses his life, but then after that, peace prevails. So you can see this simple Fraytag pyramid can explain any good story. I mean, I have taken the story particularly because, I mean, this is a story that fascinated millions of Indians for over 40 years, I would say. So you can actually use and sort of explain any good story. There could be some degree of non-linearity, of course. It might not be as linear as you see in the graph. The points in the storyline could be shifted a little bit right or left, so the climax can be even farther down towards the end, and then there is a sharp falling in action. So, but the take-home message is that this is the general formula for writing a decent story. All right. Now, yeah, this is the picture of Gabbar Singh. I'm sure all of you know that. Now, if you do a postmortem on the story, or postmortem of the Fraytag pyramid, what do you see? What do you see? Now, up to the first half, until you reach the climax, you are inducing distress. The narrator is inducing distress to the audience. All right? And then at the end of the story, you are inducing happiness and satisfaction. All right? Again, if you go back to the story, sort of look at the story a bit closely, of course, there are little bit of bumps, and there are happiness, even smaller happiness within the distress and so on. But this is, once again, the broad nature of the emotions that are involved in the Fraytag pyramid. You understand this? All right? Now, I myself am a chemist. And and I see things from a molecular point of view. All right. And this does not really require rocket science. It's something that everyone would understand if I just explain you and give you the background. Don't be scared with the structures, chemical structures. If you are not a scientist, I know most of you are, but still, I mean, this is not really important. What is really important are these molecules, the nature of the molecules and what they do. All right. The first molecule that I have drawn here is called cortisol. And it is a molecule that is secreted from your cortex when stress is induced, all right? When you are worried. For example, just before your exam, when you realize that you have not really studied enough, or even if you have studied enough, you need to prepare a bit more. Your brain is releasing cortisol along with some other chemicals as well. Of course, there could be things like adrenaline and so on, but cortisol is a very important component there. So what do? You are stressed. You know that you are not really prepared. You are anxious. You would basically go back, lock your door up and study, all right? You are going to pay attention to your studies so that you can do well, all right? So this is how cortisol would work. Now, at the end of the story, at the end of the story could be even your exam, when you have written a wonderful paper, when you have when you are very satisfied with your performance in the exam, you feel satisfied. It's over, and I have done well. I'm happy. And these are the chemicals. Of course, there are many others. I have taken a couple of just representative chemicals. This molecule that I have drawn here is called dopamine. All right. So it's over. I have done well. That sense of emotion is given to you by this chemical called dopamine. And here is another chemical that I have drawn that also gives you satisfaction. I will elaborate a little bit more on these chemicals in the subsequent slides. Okay. Now, so let us first focus on this molecule, cortisol. Now, people who know a little bit of chemistry, perhaps just by looking at the structure, would know that this is basically a steroid framework. All of you have heard of steroid, right? So this is a steroid framework. It is produced within our body, and you don't really need to buy it from the drugstore to get excited, to get anxious. It's produced in our body. Now, what does it do? What does it do? It brings focus. It brings concentration. It brings motivation. It helps you with memory. I have given the example of your exam. So you have quite a bit of cortisol in your bloodstream before the exam. And because of that, you get all these things: focus, concentration, motivation, memory, etc. All right? And it also builds up tension. Now, let me tell you a story. All right, my real life story. So I was a PhD student long back in Canada, and I was planning to come back for the first time to India to see my parents. And that time, the only vacation we had was, of course, the summer, but for PhD students, summer do not really work. The only time we got time off was during the Christmas time, all right? And the flight tickets during the Christmas time were outrageously expensive. So I basically, bought a ticket with perhaps most of my savings from my graduate school. And I was very excited that I would come home and see my parents and relatives and friends. So my flight was from Vancouver to London and from London to Calcutta. So I go to the Vancouver airport. My flight was at 20 hours. I remember this very vividly, 20 hours. So I go to the airport well in advance, and I'm just waiting there because it was not time yet. For some reason, it occurred to me that 2020 means 10:20 at night. For some very strange reason, it happened. This was something that I was believing at that point of time. And about 7:45 or so, I checked my watch and said, wait a minute, my flight ticket says the flight is at 20:20. So I take the flight ticket out and see, yeah, indeed, it is. So I have this adrenaline rush. I just run to the airlines counter, the British Airways counter, and there is no one. All right? And there is no one. I just go and bang at the table and said, is there anyone there? Is there anyone there? And after a couple of minutes, I was very nervous. I see this elderly lady comes out and says, yes, how may I help you? I said, well, my flight is at 20:20. It's in next 35, 40 minutes. Can you? Oh, the counters are closed. Sorry, we can't help you. I said, please. So I was basically begging her to help me out. And then this young lady comes, a Canadian lady, and she says, oh, let me try. And she sort of said, I can perhaps do something if the system lets me log in. So she tried, and it worked. Okay? And she gave me the boarding passes. Said, okay, rush to the counter. So I told you a story. Just pause for a second. If you have listened to the story along with me, how did you feel? I actually was supposed to do a live demo for this session, but I know it's not possible. So I actually did a Gedanken demo, a thought demo. So I took you to a journey along with me, and I want to know from you how you felt. Did you actually feel that, oh my God, what's going to happen to him? What's going to happen to me? Can he take the flight? Okay. Did you feel that during the story? I would like to have a feedback from
Yes,
my
sir.
Yes.
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yes. If you felt it that way, I was able to induce some amount of cortisol in your bloodstream from your own brain. All right. So this is the power of storytelling. You can induce some degree of emotions to your readers as you tell a story. And so this was a live demo, and thank you for giving me the feedback. Now I go to another chemical. All right. So this is dopamine. What does it do? Well, it gives you a sense of reward, satisfaction, gratification, also motivation as well. All right. Now, I will continue my story. So this lady at the counter hands over the boarding passes to me and says, well, I give you the boarding pass, but I cannot guarantee that you will be able to board the flight. I said, why? He said, you just better rush. Don't ask questions because the gates are going to close. We have no control on that. So I basically grabbed the ticket and start running. And the door was about to close. And I just tell the security at the gate that this is my boarding pass. Please let me go. And they check the boarding pass and said, you better run. And I ran and just go to the plane, sit down inside and take a deep breath. And I know now I will be able to go home. I will be able to go and see my parents. I'll be able to go home and see my friends. Until that moment, until I went through the gate, boarded the plane, sat down, that was not guaranteed. I felt a wonderful satisfaction that I made it. Okay? Once again, it's not really a full story, but if you were with me in my storytelling, you perhaps got a bit of dopamine in your bloodstream, as I told you about my happiness. I mean, that's how we are. We are human beings. We are happy when other people are happy. We are sad when other people are sad. This is the connection that we share. Of course, I mean, there are people who would say, no, I sometimes feel very happy when other people are sad. That's not your true nature. Okay? People don't say that about themselves. They say, oh, that guy, he feels happy when other people are sad. Okay, so you sort of got a bit of dopamine in your bloodstream as I narrated this story to you. Now, the key element of dopamine is happy feeling. So once again, I did a small demo to you. Now, let me come to another chemical called oxytocin. Again, many of you know about oxytocin. The structure is big. It's a peptide. Okay, it's a peptide. It's a nonapeptide. So there are 9 amino acids here. It's a cyclic peptide. And what does it do? It creates trust and bonding. All right, and I will give you once again a personal story. It's about me. When I was a little boy, I used to go to school, and we used to walk to the school. And on our way back, one day in the winter, I saw 5 little puppies and their very skinny mother. And all the puppies were sort of malnourished street dogs, okay? And I thought, oh my God, I don't know if these kids would survive, these puppies would survive. So I thought of getting them to my place. But puppies were not really very welcome at home. So I thought for a second and said, I don't think I can take all of them, because in that case, my parents might get upset and ask me to take all of them back. So what I did was I took the ugliest one, the skinniest one, and I basically grabbed it, took it home. Now, when we were little, we did not really have these gas stoves and induction cooker and so on. We used to have briquettes, coal and briquettes for cooking. And there was a particular room for storing these coal and briquettes. So I went to that room. I made a tiny little bed with some folded cloths and jute, and kept the puppy there. Went to my room, kept the backpack. I was a very good boy that day. And I told my mom that I'm hungry, can I have something? And quite readily, she gave me a glass of milk and some bread. I said, okay, I'm going to just finish them. I'm going to that room. So I went to that room where the puppy was there, and I fed some milk to the puppy and some bread, and the puppy was very happy. And that day I did not really go to play football. I stayed basically at home, and every 5 minutes or 10 minutes I was going and checking out the little puppy. Now, at night, I was worried if the puppy will be able to stay without the mother, but the puppy did not make any noise. My parents did not know that there was a puppy there. So next morning, I woke up early. I went to that room, opened the door, and this little cute puppy was sort of very happy, came crawling towards me and licked my feet. And I felt wonderful. I felt very happy. Okay. And then later on, the puppy stayed back. My parents sort of accepted the dog, and I had it for a long time. So this is the picture that I was drawing this morning for you guys. So this is me and my puppy, little me and my puppy. Now, once again, if you have listened to my story, paid attention to it, you must have felt something. And I cannot really explain how you have felt. Sort of a nice feeling, a sense of affection for the puppy, perhaps for the little boy as well. And that is because my story induced this molecule to you, to it sort of gave a rush of oxytocin in your bloodstream. Now, it's a tiny little amount. Oxytocin is very important for babies and mothers because that's the molecule that creates the bonding between the mother and the baby. So when the mother is nursing the baby, oxytocin, there is an oxytocin rush in the bloodstream of the mother. It gives you the feeling of affection. So the key elements that are associated with oxytocin is empathy and heartwarming. All right. So with these, I mean, then there are more chemicals, and if this is endorphin molecule, this is a large molecule. Again, this gives you a feeling of fun. It relaxes you. It makes you happy. And then there are other emotions that are also involved with endorphins. It takes off the pains. Okay. Now, here, let me tell you a little bit about the science behind the triggered emotions. Behind the triggered emotions. I have drawn 3 molecules here. One is dopamine. The molecule drawn at the bottom, the large molecule, is alpha endorphin. There are several kinds of endorphins. This is one of them, the alpha endorphin. And here, the second molecule that I have drawn here is morphine. Morphine, as you know, is a drug that takes off your pain. All right? Morphine is a very strong painkiller. All right. Now, I give you a very small exercise. I want you to carefully look at the 3 molecules: dopamine, morphine, and alpha endorphin. I want you to tell me if you do see any similarity, structural similarity between or among these 3 molecules. I pause for a couple of seconds. Look at the molecules. Do you see any similarity anywhere? If you do, please unmute yourself, one of you, and tell me. All right, let me do this for you. Look at these 3 motifs. I have redrawn the same thing. Now look at the 3 motifs drawn with blue. You don't really need to understand the chemistry. You don't really need to know about functional groups, etc. But just the shapes of the molecule and the groups that are attached. Look at these 3 units. You see this hexagon. You do see this nice tail with a nitrogen at the end, and you do see the hydroxy group here, OH. Look at morphine. You have that same unit. All right? And out of this huge long molecule of alpha endorphin, you do see the hexagon, the OH, the tail drawn with blue, and a nitrogen at the end. All right? So there are structural similarities among these molecules. Now, why do I ask you to look for structural similarities? Now, morphine, as you know already, perhaps, is an opioid. You know about opium, all right? Opium is a drug that is being used for thousands of years. Even in old Mesopotamia or India, opium was being used. It comes from the poppies. Now, people feel high with opium. It takes off pains. If you use tiny amount of opium in regulated quantity, it takes the pain off a patient. So when morphine or opium goes to your bloodstream from outside, what really happens if someone takes it? It goes to the opioid receptor of our brain, it binds there, and the binding is like this. All right? So it's basically a jigsaw puzzle. It goes and fits in. This molecule is one puzzle piece. Our brain receptor, where it goes and binds, is the complementary puzzle piece. It goes and binds there nicely, like this. All right? Now, if you have similar kind of molecules with similar shapes and atoms, a different molecule which looks like this or which has similar structural unit would go and bind to the same receptor exactly in the same way. Is this clear? All right, I'll repeat this. So if you have opium binding to the receptor like this, dopamine, which has a similar shape, would also go and bind and fit into that receptor and bind there. Or even this huge molecule of alpha endorphin, this particular unit, which is drawn with blue, would go and fit into that receptor. All right, exactly in the same way I have shown with that cartoon. Now, what happens? This is the actual structure of the receptor. This is a protein. You don't really need to understand too much about this. It's a protein. All these wiggly things that you see are protein chains of the receptor, and these gray molecules that you see there are these dopamine-like molecules or the morphine-like molecules that are bound to the receptor. There is a perfect fitting. And the same thing would happen to the endorphins as well. Binding takes place. It triggers a cascade of events here in our brain or even in the spinal cord, and you feel certain emotions. Now, I have shown you this thing only with the opioid, but there are receptors for all these chemicals that I have been talking about. It would, even cortisol would go and bind to a receptor. It would induce signals, and you will feel certain emotions. This is how emotions work. All right. So let me move on. So you understand how this Fraytag pyramid works. What is the science behind it? How would the emotions work? When you hear something or see something, you get emotionally charged, why it happens. So far I have told you about this. Now, I am sort of fast forwarding 150 years from Fraytag. And these are the modern key elements of storytelling in science communications. I would sort of elaborate on them briefly, and then we'll have our discussion, okay? Now, one thing at a time. So your storytelling needs to be very simple. Don't make a very complicated story. Particularly if you are interacting with non-scientists and telling them, particularly if you're writing for a magazine, for a newspaper article for the general audience, keep it simple. Don't make it too complicated. We need to de-jargonize it. So don't use the technical terms right from the beginning. I mean, imagine if I started my talk with the structure of dopamine or the structure of alpha endorphin or even all these chemical structures. Nothing would make sense to my audience, and they would simply just go to the next article and read that. they're just going to avoid it. So don't use jargons, don't be too technical. Take time to explain something if you use a jargon, right from the beginning. Now, of course, if you're writing for not for the general audience, but for experts, then you have to have these jargons, and if you don't use jargons there, just keep on explaining things, what a simple endorphin would mean, your expert readers would think that, oh, this guy perhaps himself doesn't know about this and trying to preach us about it. So it's very important that you know which audience you are pitching for. Very important. That's the most important thing in storytelling. Who are you telling the story to? Okay. Now, use analogies. Give analogies while you are explaining a difficult science. All right. Now, I'm not going to elaborate too much on this because there is a session this evening, a panel discussion, where we are going to talk a little bit more about de-jargonizing science. All right, taking the jargons off the science in science communication. So please be there. I think it would be an interesting session. The second element of storytelling is keep the element of surprise, keep some element of unexpectedness in your story. So what you're doing is you're creating gaps. You are creating expectation out of your audience. And as you go along the story, as you climb up or climb down that Fraytag triangle, you are going to fill that gap. So don't leave that gap vacant, because at the end of the story, if you just make big promises, you make big expectation and don't fulfill them, that's not going to be a good story. So you have to deliver something that you are promising, you are creating the expectation for. All right, that's very important. Now, your story, once again, should be concrete. Don't make it too convoluted. It's sort of related to the first condition that I told you, the straightforwardness, the simplicity. Your story needs to be realistic. It has to be credible to your readers. All right. Now, of course, we took a great deal of time in explaining the role of emotions. There has to be an element of humanity in your story. People should be able to relate to your story. All right. And as you do your job well, your brain would be flooded with neurotransmitters, with hormones, and you can very successfully take your readers along with yourself. I mean, I'm actually saying readers, but now there are so many different ways of science communication. You can create videos and do the same thing. All right. Now, in the beginning of the story and at the end of the story, there has to be a difference in the emotional level of your reader. It's very important. All right. And the last 2 points are, this is for science communication, so there has to be an element of science. It's not like my story where I go to Vancouver airport to catch a flight. I give you a general example. So that is also very important. It has to have a decent amount of science, and it has to be well narrated. You have to tell your stories well. You have to choose the right words. I think words have a big impact on the readers. So choose the right words very carefully. Now, all these points that I have just discussed, I have learned it from this book written by Heath and Heath. The name of the book is Made to Stick: Why Some Ideas Survive and Some Others Die. It's a wonderful book published by Random House. So this is a suggested reading once again for you. All right, so how much time do I have? Let me see. It's been almost an hour. Shall I stop here or shall I continue?
You can continue, Subhajit. It's okay.
I would also like to take questions
If there are questions right now, then we can take some now.
the other thing I can do is I can actually narrate a story and then we can discuss on that too. Maybe I'll take another 10 minutes. Is that okay?
Yes, sure.
Okay. All right. So now this is once again a personal story related to science, related to something that I do here at IISER Kolkata, among other things. It is a story of one of our students. It started with one of our students, probably about 7-8 years ago. So it was in our previous transit campus. Right now we are in this IISER Kolkata, our own campus, but we were previously located in the transit campus. And in the beginning, I used to teach chemistry labs for the undergraduate students. Now, there was a particular student who was really good. And the student, and that time the class sizes were quite small. I think the first batch had about 30 something students, and then the number of students kept on increasing. So we could pay attention to the individual students. And then the student was really good. He was bright, brilliant, and he had very good analytical power. But when it came to the chemistry labs, his performance was not that impressive. And I saw him in my lectures. He was so good, but I could not really have a correlation how the student was not that great, how he was not that great in performing in the labs. So one day when he was performing the titration experiments, which involves color change, the acid-base titration, the colorless solution would become pink, or a yellow solution would become red, or so on, depending on what indicator you're using. The student was doing the titration. There was a color change from colorless to pink. The student was doing the titration as I was watching him, and he was not stopping. The color changed from colorless to pink. He kept on adding more bases. It became red, intense pink. And I said, hey, stop. What are you doing? There was this color change. I said, I didn't see it. The moment he said that, I realized he was colorblind. So we did a very simple Ishihara test. You can look it up, Ishihara test. It's for colorblind student. And Anindita, since you were here, I'm telling the story because we sort of had a discussion on this just a couple of days ago. So I thought I'd tell the story to the students. So we realized the student was colorblind. But at that point, there was nothing I could do. Now, fast forward 2-3 more years, we were coming to this present campus from our transit campus. And I had nothing to do for about 6 months because our labs here were not ready, and we had to dismantle everything from the previous campus. So I took that as an opportunity to develop something to address the problem that I wanted to address. So what I did was I started developing a smartphone-based app that would help the colorblind student. Okay, and in my journey, I also got a wonderful, bright, brilliant student who worked with me on that project, and I'm greatly indebted to him for his wonderful contribution in this work as well. So I'll tell you that story. Now, one thing that you should know is that a huge population, percentage of population worldwide, not just in India, are colorblind. And this number is quite high for men. So 1 in 12 men would be colorblind, and 1 in 200 women would also be colorblind. Of course, there is a huge difference in the percentages. People who know a bit of genetics know perhaps why this happens, but for the time being, let us stick to these numbers. This is universal. In India, in the United States, in Japan, everywhere. This is the statistics for color blindness. So if we have 100 students in a class, we know that significant number of the male students would be colorblind, and there is a possibility that girl student could also be colorblind as well. All right. Now, how do they see the color? I hope you can see the color on the screen clearly, because sometimes it happens that these colors don't appear in the screen that in the same way that I have presented.
No, they're fine.
Okay, all right. So the first picture that I have on the top is for someone with normal vision. All right. So this is sort of red, this is orangish, this is yellowish. Now, in the second picture, it's a very common form of color blindness. It's red weak color blindness. So if someone is red weak color blindness, these are the shades that the person would see. Sorry, these are the shades that a person would see. Right? There can also be blue weak color blindness. If the person is blue weak color blindness, colorblind, then these are the colors that the person would see. And the last one for red blind, completely red blind. The first one was red, the second one was red weak, this one is red blind. You don't really see any trace of red color. You basically see a grayish, yellowish shade. All right, so this is how it would appear to people with different shades of color blindness. Now, what we plan to do, or this is just an example. When you do a titration, this is with methyl red, the color changes from red to yellow. All right, so you can imagine a person who is red blind would basically see things from yellow to another shade of yellow, which might not be very obvious, might not be very conspicuous to his eyes. All right. So how did we do this? How did we do the work? So we developed this app called the Titration Color Cam, and I will tell you a little bit more about this. So these are 3 screenshots. Here you can see a square, and inside the square you see a crosshair. All right, here you can see it a little bit clearly. A crosshair is there. All right, and that crosshair reads out the color data by using the phone camera. All right, and we have pre-programmed this app for various color changes. We tell them what we are going to observe, what we are supposed to observe in that chemistry experiment, and it would read the color data for you. And when a particular color change happens, it would notify you with a sound or a tactile feedback. Tactile feedback means the phone would vibrate, okay, so that you understand that color change has taken place. Okay. Now, with that, we performed the experiments in the lab, and before that, I'll tell you the algorithm that we have used. So I'm not really going to be too technical. This is a setup. This is the burette. This is the conical flask where you set up the titration. This is a phone camera, which basically reads out all the color data. It's mounted on a tripod, and these are the backgrounds in the lab. And this is the screen, what you actually would see in that app. Now, notice one thing. The color is pink. It's written here on the top. As the color is changing, you can see that it's written here. It has all the RGB data, red, green, blue data, and it also has the HSV data, the hue, saturation, and value data. See, when there is a color change, and it also reads the name of the color over here. When it's red, it says rouge. When it became yellow, it was sepia, and then now it's leather. So with the color change, it should sort of show you the name of the color over there and the corresponding RGB values and HSV values. So what we have done is we have taken this HSV scale, and as these numbers changed for any given color change, we have put a threshold. When it goes above that threshold, there is always a noise, right? So you have to set up a threshold. When a value goes above the threshold, the program detects it and it gives you a feedback, beep, 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 or it vibrates. All right, this is how it works. This is basically the coordinate system that I have drawn here. And these are the real results. So we did a same titration with a student who is not colorblind, and then a student with the app, and a student with the app who is colorblind. And I'm not going to discuss in great details here, but all you can see is the results that these three students obtained are very similar. It actually addressed the problem of color blindness for the chemistry students. All right. Now, we published a paper right away in the Journal of Chemical Education. This was for the technical people, people who would understand the technical bits and pieces and would reproduce this in the lab or implement this in their school, college, or university. And it's really great that I keep on getting emails from all over the world where people use this. The maximum number of users for this app is in the United States. Second is in India, and then in various countries. So at some stage, we saw that about 70 countries in the world were using this app. This is available free of cost. Any one of you can access this in Google Play Store. And it was really something which was very gratifying, very satisfying for me, knowing that it's something which is helping the colorblind students. And I keep on getting emails still. Now, I have written, it's used over 30 countries. That is old data. There is more to the story. Balraj, who worked with me, Balraj Rathore, he entered this idea in this Intel Student Design Challenge. It is organized by Intel in the United States. And after a few days of entering his data, Balraj said he has to give more details to the competition. So he sent more details. And again, after a few months, he said, Intel has sent me one email and invited me to go to New York. It's all paid for. I would go to New York and stay there for 7 days, I think. And I would present my idea. There are 6 students from all over the world who were selected, shortlisted for this. So he goes there, and then he calls me from there and says, so tomorrow is my presentation, and I will let you know how things go. So after the presentation, he calls me back once again. We have a great discussion. And he says the juries who were from Google, from IBM, from Adobe, and so on, I mean, the various big companies, their designers were the juries. So he was very happy. And he said, they have asked me a few questions which I'm supposed to go back and discuss tomorrow with them. So next day, he goes back, and his final round was there. And lo and behold, he became the global champion in this competition. So I was extremely, extremely happy and proud of my students. The proudest moment for a teacher is when you see your students becoming successful. I mean, there is nothing more that a teacher could expect. Nothing more gratifying a teacher could have. So we were really happy, and Balraj was all over in the media. It was really great. So now this was my scientific story. I want you to fit that story in the Fraytag pyramid and sort of analyze it. So this is the end of the story, and thank you for being with me. I would really like to take questions. And if you have comments, let me know. Thank you. Now I can probably see you guys. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Someone has raised their hand. Anandarup Batra.
Hello. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Anandaru.
Hello, sir. I really
Hi.
loved the presentation.
Thank
It
you.
was great. So I was wondering about when you started with the Fraytag pyramid, the example you use is a 3-hour story movie. Which
Is it?
is a 3-hour story. The movie is like a 3-hour long thing, right? So it
Oh,
takes us
yes.
through a
I
long
think,
period of building expectations and then fulfilling them over a long period of time.
yes,
And the
I mean,
brain,
Bollywood movies are notorious for that. Sholay,
right?
when it was released, was actually longer than 4 hours.
Correct. Yes, exactly. So what I was thinking was now that we have science stories in the form of say 600-word articles or 2-minute videos,
Indeed.
and when we do indeed sit down to read science articles, we'll read one after another, and if we sit for 3 hours, it would be like building expectation, resolution, a continuous barrage of that, instead of a 3-hour thing where we have a building of expectation and an eventual release. Do you think the brain chemistry is the same and it works in the same way?
Aha, excellent question. Excellent question, Anandu. I'm very pleased that you asked this question. Great question. So, there are a few things that we have to remember, we have to understand. The story, the example that I gave you is the example of a video, a movie, which can be as long as 3 hours or even longer, or maybe on an average these days it's about 2 hours, 1.5 hours, which is in some way little bit different from a technical science story. Okay, when you are narrating a story in 600 words, for example, you have to be economical with your words, with the story, and you are following these pyramids. You know, when you are basically writing the story, you are inducing all these molecules of emotions in the bloodstream of your reader. Indeed, right? Now, if you induce it too much, even if it's a 600 or even 1,000 word, then your readers would like to take a break, because there is a limited amount of emotion that our brain can take at the same time, right? So this happens to us. I mean, after we read something, we would like to take a break. I mean, you have seen the TED Talks, the great TED Talks. These are 18 minutes long, right? Not more than that. Because our brain also has a capability of focusing. We cannot really focus for an unlimited amount of time. It becomes very stressful for our brain. So, again, to answer your question directly, you have to be economical with your words. You have to understand what you are going to do, to what extent you are going to pitch the emotions in your story, what kind of article this is, where are you publishing this at, is it going to be a video, is it going to be just in a magazine, in a newspaper article. Depending on that, you have to write your story. I don't know if I have answered your question correctly. If let me know.
Yeah, I was thinking more in terms of addiction biology and how those cycles of releasing stress chemicals and uh, resolution chemicals like serotonin and dopamine, they are not a really good idea. Does that make sense? So basically, we get addicted to this cycle of stress and resolution.
No, but
And
you understand that people get addicted to YouTube,
right,
particularly.
for the exact same way, right? In the exact same way.
Well, sort of in similar sort of way these days, particularly when the schools are closed, the kids are addicted to the screen. And I'm not saying it's a good thing. It's not really a good thing that someone would watch videos for hours or watch the screen for hours. when we were kids, I mean, I personally, I needed a book to read, quite often a comic book even, to read before I could fall asleep. I mean, a lot of people, it does induce some degree of all these emotions that I was talking about, depending on the book, of course.
I do take your point about the extents, how much you
Yeah.
want to use.
Yeah. More questions? Thank you, Anandaru. Yeah.
Kevin Phillips Sabu has a question.
Yeah,
Kevin, yes.
sir, you told that while this classic narrative stories, they begin with an exposition, so that brings the reader to a climax and ends in a clear resolution. But thinking on this academic narrative arcs or academic stories, that is full of expositions, data, findings, conclusions, etc. So how can we, according to that Frtag pyramid model, how can we bring these science stories in that model? Like, is that possible to inculcate that within this model itself?
Well, I mean, I tried to sort of narrate a story from my own science. I mean, I do that quite often with some of our other stories. I know Anindita does that too. That sort of narrate our stories for the general audience. When I showed you the pyramid, what I definitely tried to stress upon is the fact that the height of the climax and the location of the climax point along the x-axis can vary, right? So, of course, your stories would definitely require a background. It could be a bit longer, that's perfectly okay. But a story cannot really proceed until and unless something happens. There has to be a purpose of the story, right? So something has to happen. There is something that is triggering the research that you are going to talk about. It might be an environmental issue, right? That's something that we do in our lab quite often. We see a problem, we try to address the problem, and we discover something. That's our climax point, and then we find a resolution towards the solution. Okay, so this is more or less what I understand and how I do it. I mean, I'm not saying that there is only one unique format, but this is one way of doing it. But I would like to hear from you guys if you have other suggestions as well. I mean, there could be so many different ways of doing the same thing. I told you my way.
Yeah. So, sir,
Yeah.
So, sir, in that case, so while reading a science story or narrating a science story, so that the students can better understand science, will that induce these kind of chemical, inductions in our brain? Like,
Okay, so the level of the induction depends on how emotional the story is, right? So not all stories would have the same amount of dopamine release, for example. It could be tiny bit. It could be tiny bit. And if suppose you are reading a very emotional journey of Rosalind Franklin, for example, you know about her. You might have heard about her.
yeah, I know.
It might not induce the same amount of dopamine that my story just induced you. Mine could be very tiny amount. But a good story, if you really want to involve your readers, has to have some degree of emotional involvement. And if you are successful in getting the emotional involvement of your reader, there has to be a release of these chemicals in the bloodstream.
Okay, sir.
There was another question. Was it Anand? No, this was Karthikeyan. Yeah, Karthikeyan.
No, sir, I didn't have a question.
Oh, I see your hand being raised.
So it was mine, sir.
Oh,
It was
Anand.
Anand.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the other thing I was thinking was the Fraytag pyramid. instead of offering a resolution, if it is left without one, in say like a cliffhanger, because we would like our audience to think, and if we leave them at a cliffhanger, allow them to think beyond what is already written, wouldn't that be a possible way to go about it? Because yesterday we were being told to, you
True,
know,
true. I understand what you were saying. Again, as I would say that there are various formats depending on what you are doing. Because when I'm reporting a science, that my purpose of reporting is to let my audience know what someone has done. This is a success story. At the same time, there could be write-ups for, I know Professor Gadakar did not encourage us to use the word write-ups. I'm so used to it. Sorry for that. So we can write things which would actually provoke our readers to think. And it's a question. We are putting the problem in front of them so that they start to think and they take actions. For example, during the pandemic, there are so many horrible things that are happening. At the end, you are not really getting a satisfaction when you are writing the report, but you'd like to leave your readers in the cliffhanger, let them think what has happened, and that would prompt them to take action. For example, wearing masks, using hand hygiene and so on. So yeah, definitely depending on what you are writing, that definitely could be a word.
thank you, sir.
Okay, so next we have Apeksha who has a question.
So, sir, I had a general question. What could be some tips to not overdo the emotional connection aspect with the audience, so that the facts do not get lost and vice versa? How to strike a balance, and of course, this could vary topic wise, but are there some rules of thumb?
Yeah, I mean, the same thing happens in movies. There are so many movies that are so mushy that I don't really like to watch them.
Yeah.
Right. So I think it's very important that you are self-aware of what you are doing, and read your story, write something, leave it for a day or two, read it by yourself, and see how you feel, and then you can pass it on to a friend and ask for opinions. What do you think? Do you think I have overdone something?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So get a second opinion from someone, a friend, and by friend I mean someone who would not just say something to make you happy, but who would actually give you a very honest feedback, saying that I didn't really like this part, I did not like this part. Yes, it's too emotional, tone it down, and so on. So it's always a good idea. And if your friend doesn't do it, your editor would.
Yeah. So the second point you mentioned seems to work for me when I write something and when I leave it for 1 or 2 days. So if I read it the same day, then I won't be able to do much.
Same thing happens with me. Yeah, I think it's a general thing for most of us. Yes, exactly. I would write something, leave it for a few days, not even look at it, forget completely about this, do other things, and then after a few days I'd go back and read it. And I personally, many times it happened that I have just shredded that. I did not like it at all.
Thank you, sir.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we are on.
Are there any other questions?
If not, Shubhajit, I just wanted to say I completely enjoyed the talk. And of course, my favorite story is the Oxytocin and the puppy.
Yeah, I expected that, Anandita. Thank you.
Absolutely wonderful.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much. I hope to see all of you in the evening. And I hope that, this cyclone is coming here. I hope that we don't have any power failures and stuff. Then things could become difficult. But I'm hoping that everything will be all right. Thank you very much for your attention and the wonderful questions that you have asked. And I hope you get something out of this workshop. I'm sure you will. Take care.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thanks.
So we have reached the end. Before all of you leave, I would request all of you to switch on your cameras so I could take a snapshot for our social media campaign. And if any of you have a problem with your face being visible on the social media, then you don't need to switch it on. Okay, 1 second. Change.
Karthik, your own camera is off.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So
let me straight. Okay.
Yeah. 1 second. Another one. Capture. Okay. Yeah. It's done.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir, for that
Thank you
amazing
so much.
talk.
So the next session is at 3, right?
Yes, ma'am. It's at 3.
And the panel discussion is in the evening, isn't it?
It's at 7 o'clock.
7 o'clock. Okay.
Okay.
See you there, Subhajit.
See you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir, for that
Thank you
amazing
so
talk.
much.
So the next session is at 3, right?
Yes, ma'am. It's at